Welcome back to the Land Bulletin podcast, where every other week we bring you experts in the field to impart their knowledge when it comes to the ranch and sporting property market, buying and selling advice, the latest best stewardship practices, as well as topics that impact landowners every day. I'm your host, Haley Murr. Let's jump in. The San Luis Valley is a vast mountain valley spanning over 8,000 square miles that crosses the border of south central Colorado and north central New Mexico. Today, we have conservation and water expert Rio de la Vista on the show to walk us through why this area is important to Colorado and the West. Let's see what we discovered. Hi out there. Welcome back to our Land Bulletin series. I am Haley Murr, and I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Development here at Murr Ranch Group. This is the Land Bulletin, where every other week we discuss the ranch and sporting property market, buying and selling advice, the latest best stewardship practices, as well as topics currently impacting landowners. Murr Ranch Group is a full-service ranch real estate brokerage and consulting company focusing on legacy ranches and sporting and conservation properties around the West. Today, we're going to be looking at a specific region in Colorado. The San Luis Valley is a vast mountain valley spanning over 8,000 square miles that crosses the border of south central Colorado and north central New Mexico. With under 50,000 residents, the valley is a high elevation, semi-arid agricultural area bounded by the San Juan Mountains and the Continental Divide to the west, forming the headwaters of the Rio Grande. To the east are the 14,000-foot peaks of the Sangre de Cristos Range, including the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve. Today, we'll walk through why this area is so important to Colorado and to the West. Helping me out today to talk about this crucial area of Colorado and the West is someone that Ken introduced me to. This is Rio de la Vista. Rio is the former assistant director of Rio Grande Headwaters Land Trust, former founding director of the Salazar Rio Grande del Norte Center at Adams State University, and continues to work on regional water issues in this specific area. So couldn't think of a better person to talk about this region with. Rio, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
To get started, I'd love to know why you chose San Luis Valley. What brought you onto this specific region of the state?
Well, I think the San Luis Valley chose me and the Rio Grande as well with the name Rio. Kind of seemed predestined or something. So I was living in Pagosa Springs, working on the board of the land trust there, working in land use planning, land management, including holistic management and restoration work. And then I was up skiing at Wolf Creek Ski Area, and I met this amazing woman, Kathy McNeil, who ranched with her husband Mike south of Monte Vista over here in the San Luis Valley. They were some early adopters of holistic management, and she was one of the founders of the Rio Grande Headwaters Land Trust. So she invited me to come over to the valley for some meetings, and I just felt like it caught me. And oh gosh, there was just such great potential for conservation. The communities had and still has deep connection to the land through their heritage, through active agriculture. And of course, it's pretty darn beautiful here too.
I love driving through that valley. And for those of you who are listening, sometimes we get stuck on that I-25 corridor when we're going south. But if you have the chance, you should really take your time and go through the San Luis Valley because, like you said, Rio, it's one of the most crucial areas. And we'll get into kind of the specifics. But beyond just like the importance of the natural components in the land itself, it's just the beauty in general. It's just seeing the Sangre de Cristos to the east there while you're driving through this big mountain valley. I can see why you ended up there.
Thanks. Yeah. It's home now.
It's home. And I was telling Ken, I was like, I know Rio does a lot of work with water and the rivers down there. Was it just happenstance that her name happens to be Rio? He was like, I didn't even think of that. That goes to show Ken's lack of Spanish knowledge. So,
well, like I said, I think it was predestined somehow because I live on the Rio Grande. I work on Rio Grande water issues and conservation issues. So it just was like, okay, I belong here.
You rolled right in. So I guess we'll go into more specifically what makes this valley so important and significant in terms of Colorado and the West.
I often say that the valley, the San Luis Valley, the valley as we call it, is a microcosm of almost every Western land and water issue, except thankfully we don't have oil and gas development, which I know has huge impacts in other areas. But pretty much everything else we're facing on a small scale, but with a community and a region that's pretty tied together. So I think that gives us an opportunity to really look at solutions and work together on them. And of course,
Mhm.
water. I said that the top three issues here is our water, water, and water. And it unites all of these issues from, I mean, we have challenges around, our senior surface water rights, what's happening with reduced river flows, timing of river flows with climate change, the much more junior groundwater rights, and the severe aquifer depletion that has occurred here with our vast underground aquifer. And then, of course, the threat of external water exportation to
Mhm.
bring water out of the valley to other parts of Colorado, and a lot of other things like loss of wetland habitat and stuff that we all care about and have to deal with.
And just for, the knowledge of people listening, which regions of Colorado are pulling water from the San Luis Valley? What's kind of the major source of exportation there?
Luckily, there is no there's a couple of ditches that take water out of the valley, but very minor. And that's something that
Mhm.
has united the community because there's been threats. As David Robbins, a water attorney, said one time, if you live in a dry place and you have some water, someone's coming after it. And it's been happening multiple times over many decades where people put together investment groups and say, well, we can use this water to greater financial benefit somewhere else. So we're going to come in and take it or buy it and export it. So far that has not happened. And I think it's really united the community over many decades across a lot of otherwise what might be social political divides.
Because you definitely see that in a lot of other regions of Colorado.
Yeah.
And I think beyond that, there's a vast history and reason why this valley is so different than other parts of Colorado. Even just how the land itself was divided out back in the day.
It was originally, part of early Spanish settlers, and it started. I mean, the first time a Spanish came here was 1694, is what the history tells us, and then the settlers started coming in the 1850s, of course, pushing out the Native Americans. But the settlement and then the ownership of land is just so diverse here that Costilla County and in the southeast part of the valley is like 99% private lands and
Mm.
incredible cultural diversity of those early Hispanic settlers. And then on the northwest part of the valley, Mineral County is like 97% public land. So that diversity creates a lot of different challenges, but they're all facing development, subdivisions, and of course, there's an emerging recreational economy across the area too. But we're still one
Mhm.
of the most viable agricultural regions. We really are. That's our main economic base. There's crop production largely on the valley floor, and then the historic ranching operations are typically around the perimeter of the valley, along the river corridors with this, and those are the typically hold the senior surface water rights. And a lot of them also have public land grazing on the BLN, Bureau of Land Management uplands and the National Forest.
And a lot of those, you talk about historic ranching operations. I mean, we've handled some of kind of the larger landowners out there, like down at Cielo Vista, those kinds of things. But beyond kind of those bigger landowners, there's a lot of families that have been ranching there for generations in that valley.
Exactly, and they're just tied deeply to the land here, and I think that's what has helped conservation grow and thrive here, and a lot of participation by landowners and keeping the land that they were given by their ancestors to give to their future generations. When I was working at
Mhm.
the Rio Grande Headward Land Trust, which we called RIGHT for short, I did presentations. Sometimes I would do a before and after picture, and I would use the same photo. I said, "This is why we're doing this conservation because if you live in the San Luis Valley, it's not classically beautiful like some of the high mountain towns, and it's a little behind a lot of parts of Colorado where development was just coming on so fast and property values were going so high. So we kind of had a little bit of a head start, and we worked it as hard and still are working as hard as we can to keep it viable and intact. But we really these landowners that still had inherited it land in many cases really wanted to keep it that way, and their families were still making a living on the land here. So I think that really prompted a lot of conservation.
And I know you, when we were talking a little previously, there's a lot of incredible wetland habitat down in San Luis Valley too.
Yeah, we have just phenomenal wetlands, really unique ones like at the Great Sand Dunes National Park. I never learned, one of the things I learned here is there's interdunal wetlands. Like within the sand dunes, you'll go over a pile of sand, a little hill of sand, and there's a wetland in the middle of it. And they have what they call endemic species that only exist in that little wetland on the whole, as far as they know, on the whole planet. And, that's what brought some of our great partners to the Valley, the Nature Conservancy, that helped acquire some of the large remaining land grant properties like the 100,000-acre Baca Ranch that now is part of the Great Sand Dunes and also the Baca National Wildlife Refuge. So protecting those natural resources and the water that sustains them is really important.
After listening to all these incredible components to the valley, this might be stating some of the obvious, but why should we care about specifically the things that are happening in this valley? I think people who are listening, a lot of times, like you said, when they think of ranches, they think of these high alpine, beautiful spaces, hunting properties, that kind of thing. And a lot of times they live in Denver, they live in areas of Steamboat, things like that. So how does this microcosm and the impacts that are happening to the water in San Luis Valley, why is it important to the rest of us too?
Because of the way this community has come together, partly in reaction to these external water threats of exportation externally and stuff. I think urban people need to realize also where their water comes from and how do we, as a state, as a region, maintain the water in the rural areas that maybe they like to go recreate in or go hunting and
Mhm.
go to the public lands. If that water in those areas, in the source areas, are really important to be maintained there. So, and then there's these effects of climate change are across the West. You can just see the river flows are down by 15 to 20% almost universally across Western rivers. And we all need that water for whatever purposes, from our household to our recreation and the things we care about with wildlife habitat and so on. Keeping these rural areas healthy, they're really important for sustainable water supplies, for carbon sequestration. I like to use both water and carbon sequestration interchangeably because you can't do one without the other. We have across the West these severe depletion of our reservoirs. In our case, our aquifer is our reservoir, and we have a vast underground aquifer, but it's been severely depleted due to overpumping.
Mhm.
So again, it's really required our community to come together to figure out how to reduce that pumping voluntarily. Other parts of Colorado saw the state come in and shut down all of the wells. If that happened here, when we saw that happen, we just went, oh boy, if that happens to this valley, our economy would be so severely impacted. So we have to work together in some pretty unique approaches to try to restore that. We can restore it from all of our years of monitoring and study. It does look like an aquifer that can be recovered, but not if we don't figure out how to reduce the pumping and get it back in balance. So I think there's this concept of balancing the supply and demand on water across the region. Is we're all facing that. I mean, there's just plenty of evidence for plenty of need for that balance to be achieved.
You spoke to it earlier, but the fact that the San Luis Valley is kind of this community that can handle things on a community level, and your neighbor, and you can create these solution based plans with one another, I think is something that can be compounded on and used in different regions too. So I know there's a lot of community involvement with some of the solutions that are being created in San Luis Valley to handle some of the problems that you're all facing.
It's just remarkable. And I think what another part of really what held me here over all these years is that people really do show up and work together and try to come up with solutions that address multiple needs, not just we're gonna do housing developments, so let's dry up more farms. Well, we know what happens when we dry up more farms. It affects our overall economy. think we have a pretty good sense of pros and cons and the things that we need to try to keep in balance because we care about all of it. So it's really been rewarding in that sense. The Colorado Water Conservation Board even named our Rio Grande Basin Roundtable the Kumbaya Basin because they come and I mean I've just heard it over and over many years from people come here and go, "Wow, you people talk to each other. You get along, you work together, you know, that the kids go to the same schools, we show up in the same places. There's just not that many of us, and we can't afford to not work together for the things we all care about."
It sounds like there's a lot of different organizations, like the broader land conservation community that's learning from the San Luis Valley. You talked about TNC, Ag Land Trust, Colorado Open Lands, and then Great Outdoors Colorado.
Absolutely.
Are they coming and working on projects with you all, or and listening to some of the solutions that you've created?
Well, absolutely, and they contributed to them. I mean, we really were inspired by the Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust when we started the Rio Grande Headwaters Land Trust because we just felt like that their approach was going to resonate in this agricultural community.
Mhm.
Colorado Open Lands helped Rio Grande Headwaters Land Trust get up and running. It's kind of a nursery land trust or something. Of course, Great Outdoors Colorado, which I should mention that Ken Salzar was very instrumental in founding and has just invested, you know, across the state. I mean, it's such an, I think we're the envy of the entire nation having
Mhm.
GOCO, you know, and the funding that the lottery funds bring to conservation, recreation, outdoor preservation. It's just an incredible resource. And it's a direct reflection of the development pressure across the state, too, that we voted on that multiple times to invest that much in our state's future. So thanks to that and federal money, and you know, I think we just that we started the Rio Grande Initiative back in about 2005, and by 2015 we had you know protected over 25,000 acres along the Rio Grande and the Caneos River, and like $50 million worth of conservation. And that was really a credit to the landowners who stepped up and contributed their part. But I think what's
Mm.
unique too is that something the Rio Grande Headwaters Land Trust truly what was formed to try to address this water exploitation threat and just saying if we could tie enough senior surface water rights to these working lands with conservation easements, that would make it less viable for exploitation.
Mhm.
You know, we had incredible collaboration and partnership with the local water districts, the Rio Grande Basin Roundtable, our federal and state agency partners. And that's pretty unique here, too. And that's more and more every land trust across the West is more and more involved with their water partners in their communities. And that's just absolutely critical.
And what kind of sets those types of easements apart from, let's say, I don't want to call every conservation easement a run of the mill conservation easement, but how are those different than maybe some of the ones we typically hear about as it relates to water?
You know, the earlier conservation easements with senior surface rights that, right, you know, that Rio Grande Headwaters Land Trust and did Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust along focused a lot on the Swatch Creek corridor, had pretty what a lot of connection of keeping the water on that land, but as over time, the need to maybe create some flexibility, not for exportation or drying up of land, but perhaps some leasing, some flexibility to try to meet as many needs as we can with the same water. So,
Mhm.
and then with the groundwater depletion that's occurred here, Colorado Open Lands and Wright developed a concept and working with the Rio Grande Water Conservation District to do the first of its kind ever groundwater conservation easement. So that's kind of an evolution of that tool to try to make sure that we're keeping the water in the ground and restoring our aquifer here. And there's been a lot of interest in that particular version of a conservation easement from a lot of different partners across the West.
Like you said, it's a microcosm, and a lot of solutions are being created in your valley. So
Yeah.
it's that's just another tool.
A lot of places have underground aquifers which are being depleted. So, uh, so same kind of, you know, another tool, familiar but unique, and an evolution of it. And that's what conservation has evolved, will continue to evolve, I'm sure.
Mhm. As we look forward, how do you see kind of the future for the valley in the next 10 years from a perspective of water conservation, not to be too broad, but
Yeah.
it seems like a lot of solutions are happening. It seems like you guys have been ahead of the curve on a lot of issues that have arisen. How do you see the future of the valley and its connection to the rest of the West?
Well, I think here we're going to continue to work with willing landowners who want to conserve their lands. I think it was even some years ago, if the San Luis Valley itself were a state, we would be in the top 10 of conserved acreage across the whole country.
Oh,
So we've
wow.
had a lot of really great and landowner engagement on that, and hopefully that will continue. There's a lot of places I drive around and wish we could get an easement on. So I still say we, even though I'm not working directly in that work right now, but I still feel a sense of ownership, and I think that's is pretty predominant here. Is we all have a sense of ownership of the future of this place. So continuing to develop those kinds of tools like groundwater conservation easements that hopefully could be useful elsewhere. There's just an incredible amount of restoration work going on here too in terms of river restoration, upgrading really aging infrastructure that makes our water supply, water rights go further and again do more things with the same water
Mhm.
while meeting our interstate obligations to downriver to New Mexico and Texas. There's a lot of work that I'm very excited about is coming forward through enhanced land management that landowners, there's just all kinds of activities, grazing management being one of the biggest tools available to help build soil health and thus back to that water and carbon sequestration, the holding capacity of soils on both public and private lands. I think that's one of the biggest factors that can really help us be more resilient in the face of climate change, trying to sustain that water supply, the working lands, healthy public lands, wildlife habitat. So I like to say conservation is a gift to the future. So let's give it to the future generations.
I love that. And what better people to know the land and to know the solutions and to come up with ideas than kind of the families that have ranched and farmed those lands for generations. It's just really neat to see all of them come together. I watched a PBS documentary about the water down in San Luis Valley, and it interviewed a lot of the families and the ditch riders that are in charge of kind of protecting those rights. So it's just neat to hear that there's all these different ideas coming out from it.
Yeah. And that's what, you when you introduced me, a little over 5 years ago, I said, well, I'm not going to get it all done in my career. So about that time, the Salazar family had founded the Salazar Rio Grande del Norte Center at Adams State University. So I was able to go there and help create more water education there and our annual State of the Basin Symposium, which is happening every year to kind of update our community on water issues and these kinds of opportunities for solutions. And, trying to engage more of our towns and counties in water solutions too. So lots of opportunities for the future generations to be engaged in that.
Are you speaking at Adams State anytime soon, or is that
I'm not speaking there, but the symposium, this annual 2023 symposium, is going to be held on May 6th on campus.
we'll send some of the details out to people who are listening because I think if
Great.
people are in the area, that would be really neat to hear.
And quite a bit of it's available streaming, and the past years are all available too on the Salzar Center playlist at the Adams State YouTube channel. So we're trying to build that knowledge base and make it available to people if they want to learn more about how water works on the Rio Grande and what our community is thinking about.
And I know for the listeners, we'll provide some of that. But I know Rio, you had a poem that you wanted to read to those who are listening. So I'll let you kind of.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think I tried to. I was so honored. I was nominated by my colleagues and friends, and I received an award in 2011, the Environmental Law Institute's 2011 National Wetland Award for Conservation and Restoration. Went to Washington, D.C., and got to make some remarks at the award ceremony. And what came for me was a poem. So it was inspired by, there's a Vietnamese monk who passed away not too long ago, Thich Nhat Hanh, and he had a saying, if when he sees a piece of paper, he would saw a cloud because the cloud brought the rain that grew the trees that made the the paper possible, and that inspired this poem. about wetlands. So it's titled Here at the Headwaters of the Rio Grande. When I see a wetland, I see the clouds lifting off the western desert, up and over the crest of a continent. When I see a wetland, I see the snowflakes piling ever higher up on the divide, white on white, winter's delight. When I see a wetland, I see the high country snow melting into rivulets, dancing down a steep mountainside, joining forces, making a river. When I see a wetland, I hear the teeming life, the song, the chirp, the quack, the honk, and the fluttering call of 20,000 sandhill cranes announcing the arrival of spring. When I see a wetland, I see the meadow of red-tipped rushes where the ducks raise their broods, the cows eat their fill, and the rest is made into hay when the sun shines. When I see a wetland, I see the overflow of spring, or more likely here, the dam, the ditch, the water right, and the irrigator with a shovel spreading the wet across the land. When I see a wetland, I see the river water greening a narrow ribbon of life across this vast dry country, holding the wet here for a time. The lifeblood for us all, whether legs, wings, or fins. When I see a wetland, I remember the herd of bull elk coming for a drink in the gray evening light. Even the most majestic stag must bow his head to water. When I see a wetland, I learn of the nature of beauty. It exists for its own sake, a true and vital force that gives our lives meaning. When I see a wetland, I see my friends and neighbors going to one more meeting, asking the hard questions, thinking ahead, making plans, and making them happen. When I see a wetland, I see the power of community that cares enough to try, to keep the wet, to keep the land, and give it to the future.
That was great. I love that.
Thank you.
I need to get a copy of that and print it out for Ken and put it on his desk.
Oh, great. Well, it's kind of tried to encapsulate all the things we've just been talking about the place, the love of it, and the other beings that share it with us, and the future and its future too.
No, I loved that, Rio. That was really special. It really does. It talks about, yeah, the people, the rural community, the history, the natural component. That was really beautiful. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge and your love for such a beautiful region of the state. We appreciate you being on the show today.
Well, really an honor. And, as I like to say, if we can't figure it out here, I don't know who can. So hopefully we can be an inspiration, and, we learn from others, and hopefully others can learn from us, and we'll figure this out as a region and give it to the future. So,
yep. And we can all learn a little something from San Luis Valley.
Thank you.
So thanks, Rio. Thanks for joining us today. To learn more about the ranch real estate market or our ranch marketing process, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter on our website at merranchgroup.com or give us a call at 303-623-4545. See you next time.